Great. It's great to have you guys here with us today. Really excited. This is the first shop program that we are bringing to an online format. So again, thank you guys for coming and thank you in advance for your patience as we may encounter like various technical issues. It's all part of the learning curve, but hopefully we won't have any of that and we'll just be able to have a great time sewing today. Couple of things, like Caitlin mentioned earlier, if you have any questions, we've disabled mics and video for this webinar. So if you do have a question, there's a Q&A section and you can just bring that up on your Zoom menu. Now, today we are also recording the webinar, so we'll be making that available on the library website later in case you want to view it, review what we do today. And we're gonna be doing a pretty basic beginner introductory project, which is this drawstring bag. You can see, just pull it and it cinches, and it's pretty cool, very versatile if you need it for dice or cards or straggling coins, whatever. It's also a great beginner project because it utilizes each of the various stations you need for most projects. So ironing, cutting, sewing, and it is also a great tool for learning how to sew in a straight line, which, believe it or not, is probably the most understated skill in sewing. But before we get right into the project, I'm going to quickly introduce myself. I'm Tom. I am a library associate in the makerspace for Arlington County Public Libraries. The person who is helping me on tech support today is Caitlin Antonazio. She is the Maker Librarian team lead for the shop. So she is the best person that you guys can throw your questions at, also me, and also, yeah, is going to be helping us out on tech support today. So thank you again, Caitlin, for being here. Now we're going to do a brief tour of the stations that I mentioned earlier. So we're just going to really quickly turn that camera around. So ignore my home. But you see here, our first station is an ironing station. Just gonna have an ironing board and an iron setup. And then you also see we have our fabric here ready to go. And then over here, we have our cutting station. Now, there are a couple of different items here, and I'll go over their specific purposes later. But basically, all of our cutting is going to be happening over here. And now, this is our sewing station. So we just have a Singer sewing machine here, some thread, and over there in the corner, if you can see it, is just an empty bobbin. You don't need to have a Singer sewing machine for this project. Any sewing machine that does a straight stitch will do. And we're just gonna get started. So, and please also feel free throughout this to use the Q&A area to kind of let me know if there's something I'm doing that you can't see. That'd be very helpful. We definitely want to make visibility great for this. Now, when you get started with this project, you're going to take the fabric that you've chosen, and I kind of did this already, but you're going to want to pre-treat it. And what that means is that whatever directions come with your fabric for washing it or for general maintenance of it, you're gonna want to do that to it ahead of time. Now, this is a pretty standard cotton blend. So if you have something like this, you can just throw it in with your normal laundry, wash it, dry it, and basically what that does is any shrinking that's going to happen with your fabric is going to have already happened. So you won't have to worry about finishing your project, throwing it in the wash, and then having it shrink on you. So pre-treat it, and then once you have done that, the next thing you're going to do is iron it. So I'm gonna start ironing. My iron has different settings. So it has a setting that is specifically for cotton, and that's great. But if you don't have that, you can easily just use a standard iron and just make sure that that heat is high enough that it's getting the wrinkles out. And this is actually also important for a similar reason as to why we pre-treat it, and that's because all those wrinkles actually do add up as far as creased fabric that is going to make your measurements inaccurate unless you get them out. That won't be super important today because we're just making a simple bag, but if you ever wanted to use the principles here today on a more advanced project like garment construction, that is definitely something that you'll want to do. Now, I'll also mention, just because it's kind of a fun fact, but there are actually two different terms in sewing for this type of process, and it's ironing and pressing. And for ironing, that's basically when you put the iron on the fabric and move it around like we just did. And then pressing is basically if you are trying to open up a seam, you'll want to just press your iron along the seam. And if you're using a pattern, they may specify this. And the reason for that is just because it puts a lot less stress on the seam, and it will make it last longer because those seams won't be coming undone. If you want to super prep your fabric, you can also iron it on the other side. Again, just really keeping in mind whatever directions come with the fabric that you got for your project, because obviously if you're using something that's dry clean only, you're not going to want to put it under too much heat. Similarly, if something is a synthetic like polyester blend that has some plastic in it, so you'll want to make sure that you're using the appropriate heat settings, which will be low. But we're going to move on now to our cutting station. Let me just adjust the angle real quick. And here you'll notice we have a couple of different things going on. So we have our cutting mat, and this is really only important if you're going to be using a rotary cutter like I have here today. A lot of people prefer this. It's just a circular blade like you would use for slicing a pizza, and it can really make the cutting process a lot faster. I am not coordinated enough to use this accurately because I can't seem to keep the straight line, so I'm just going to be using normal fabric scissors. You can find these at any fabric store. Alternatively, if you just buy scissors and consistently use it for only fabric, that works too, because the main thing is that you want to keep it sharp. Now, I also have a quilting ruler here, and this is really handy if you happen to have access to one, because it's transparent. It has the measurements on both sides. This right here kind of gives you your seam allowance for most projects, and if you don't have this, that's also okay, because you can just use a ruler or measuring tape. A lot of times your sewing machine may come with some measuring tape, so that's just something that's nice to have. It is not necessary. And then this is a seam ripper, also probably one came with your machine. And you're going to want to hang on to this just in case you make any mistakes, because you'll be able to take out your seams, and I'll be able to tell you what that looks like a little bit later. But for now, you have your fabric, and here we have the same purple fabric that I used on the example bag. And you'll notice that there is a very saturated color side, and that's what we're going to call our right side because it has the pattern looking the way we're going to want it to look on the outside. And you'll see on the other side, it is much more faded. And technically, this is really something that's subjective. Like if you like this side of the fabric more, you can certainly have that be the right side of your fabric, and that's what's going to show on the outside. But for intents and purposes and for demonstrating what these terms mean, the side that you're going to want showing is the right side, and the side on the inside is the wrong side. So you're going to take your fabric, and you're basically going to have it right now either on the wrong or right side because the measurements are going to be the same. And you're going to want to cut basically a rectangle. And this is my cardboard pattern here. I made this because Intro to Sewing is a program that we teach often. So rather than having to make the measurements every single time, I've just cut it out on cardboard. And then that's going to make things much quicker as we do this more and more. But you don't necessarily need this. You just need to mark a 6-inch by 18-inch rectangle. And that's going to be the shape of our bag today before we sew it. So just going to move that up a little bit. I'm also going to talk about marking our fabric. So we have our pattern on here, and I'm going to be using a Sharpie today to mark it. I don't recommend that you use a Sharpie just because there is the danger of having the ink from the Sharpie bleed either through your fabric or having it visible in some way, or even mixing with your other clothes. So you at home are going to want to use either a fabric pen, which is something that they sell. People have used pencil or tailor's chalk. As long as you're confident that when you throw it in the wash again, it's going to come out. That's really the important thing. But just for the sake of visibility, I wanted to use a Sharpie today. So hopefully I don't get too much in the frame here, but we're just gonna trace this out real easily. I'm also putting some weight down on my pattern, just because this will help prevent any shifting that happens and could kind of screw up our measurements. But there we have our rectangle. Awesome, that was super easy. Now we're gonna cut. Again, I'm not super coordinated. If you have a rotary cutter, feel free to use that. This is actually a great project to practice using your rotary cutter with because it's all straight lines. But for me, I've just kind of given up on using the rotary cutter. So that is why I am using just regular fabric scissors. Something important to note too, going back to the right and wrong sides of fabric, is that some fabrics are like this one, and they don't really have a right or wrong side, which in a way is good because, you know, you kind of don't have to worry about doing something on the incorrect side of it. On the other hand, for any pattern that's not symmetrical, it will just be harder to tell if you're doing something on the right side or the wrong side. So like a sleeve, for instance, is a pattern that would have asymmetrical sides to it just because they generally make the curve the curve steeper for the front part of the sleeve than the back part of the sleeve, because when you reach for something, you tend to reach in front of you more, so they account for that space. So if it's the same on both sides, you have a chance of screwing it up. But now we have cut out our 6-inch by 18-inch rectangle. Yay, congratulations. I'm gonna move our scrap aside, save that for another project another day. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm just going to go ahead, get my Sharpie out again, and I'm gonna mark 1 inch from either side. So got that basically straight. And I'm going to do the same to the other side. And basically, this is going to be a line that I fold. So when we fold it in like this, we're actually losing 2 inches total of the bag space on each side. So that being said, something you can also do while you're at your cutting station is cut off your cord. So you can just kind of eyeball the length of your cord. And for this, I'm using, you notice, regular scissors just because cord is very, very tough and will really dull your scissors quickly. So I do not want to use my nice fabric scissors for that. Takes a little bit of elbow grease if you do, and then you'll take the cord, tie a knot on each side. And something to mention too is you also do not need to use cord for this. This can be another area for you to get creative with your project. You can use ribbon, you can use bias tape, you can use twill tape, anything that you feel is going to look good as the cinching mechanism of your bag. You can totally use this as an opportunity to have some fun and be creative. And now we're going to go on another field trip, and that is to the sewing machine. Whee! And while I set up to show you how to thread the top part of the machine and thread the bobbin, feel free to take this time to put any questions you have so far in the Q&A area, and Caitlin can relay those to me, and I'll try and multitask and answer your questions as I set up for this next part.
It doesn't look like we have any questions so far.
That's awesome. That just means I'm an awesome teacher. Yay. You guys are muted, but I am sure you are laughing at how hilarious I am. All right. So step one for your sewing machine is you're going to want to make sure that it's on. Second thing you're going to want to do is check out your manual, because again, you only need a sewing machine that does a straight stitch for this project. That being said, there's a lot of different brands of sewing machine. There's a lot of different models within those brands, and a lot of times there will be minor differences to how the machines are threaded. And basically, look at your manual, or a lot of times they will have the instructions on the machine itself, and it's kind of hard to see. My cat is trying to get in the shot, he's right there. But these small like markings around the machine kind of tell you how to thread it as well. So like the 5 here is step 5 for the threading of the upper part of the thread. But again, your manual will have clear pictures if you can't see it on your machine. So
I also wanted to mention that YouTube is a great resource for people to learn how to thread their particular machine. if you do just a regular search for your machine name and threading, there's a lot out there that can be really helpful for your particular machine.
Absolutely, absolutely. YouTube is a great tutorial resource. So another thing I've kind of done that's specific to me is I'm using these large spools of thread. And if you're using this, what I've done to kind of accommodate it is I just put it in a mug next to my machine and then thread it as normal. And that works fine. I haven't had any issues with the tension of the thread. Thread tension is basically how tightly thread is being sewn into the fabric, which can sometimes cause it to pucker or be really loose and make it come undone. But otherwise, your machine will normally have a spool holder on it that will accommodate the more common sizes. That being said, the next thing you'll want is this guy, which is a bobbin. And so, taking your thread, there's my cat again. He's really trying to get in this, but you take your thread and then following the path indicated on your machine for the bobbin thread, which will be different than the upper thread. So bringing it around here is how it works on my machine. And most of the time you'll see on your bobbin, there are some, I'm glad you guys like the cat. I'm glad I can see that you guys like the cat. Yeah, his name is Sirik. But on your bobbin, we have some holes that you can put the thread through. So you'll want to make sure that that hole is on, is like the top of your bobbin, relatively speaking. So once you have threaded for your bobbin, you'll just take the thread and put it through your bobbin, going out the top. Yay. Ooh. And then it just goes right there. Now, for my machine, you need to move it over to the side. And then that kind of lets the machine know that it is now winding the bobbin. And then I just hold the thread as it gets started. So you'll see now it's got some of the thread wrapped around the bobbin, and I can just let it go. And just takes a minute. And we don't need a ton of thread for this project. So filling it up a third of the way is normally a good rule of thumb. And that is something you want to check on before you get started with a project, is to make sure that your bobbin is full, because I cannot tell you how many times I've been sewing and run out of bobbin thread and had to redo a whole ton of stitches because I didn't realize that my bobbin was out of thread, and then none of the stitches worked. So now that you have your wound bobbin, again, check with your machine, but for mine, it wants the thread to be wrapping around the bobbin counterclockwise. And then just remove the bobbin lid, revealing the bobbin case. Insert the bobbin, and then it wants us to go counterclockwise briefly, then clockwise around this metal bar. And really that's it. You want your thread to be facing away from you, and that will go for the top thread too. But a lot of the more modern machines, that's all you have to do for it, which makes it super convenient. I remember the older machines used to have the bobbins where you insert them from the side, and that is a little bit more complicated. So this saves us some time. And now before we move on to our top thread, you're just going to want to go back here and click that guy back to the center of the machine so that it knows now we're working on top thread and normal stitching. So now we are going to work on threading the top part of the machine. Just getting the camera in really, really close to make it clear. And then of course, I'm happy to try and answer your guys' questions. But we're taking the thread and we're going to go through this gap before taking a left at this white plastic circle. And then we have the thread go in through this gap. Adjust again, give you guys a better view. Right. And this thread's going to go down through here, up again. And then that just kind of makes a loop at the top. We bring it down again. And it's just been pulled through. Now, let me see if I can make that clearer. So here, you're going to take the thread and it goes behind this, this little metal bar here, and it's so small, but that's where it wants to go. And then basically, once you've done that, you can just take your thread and put it through the eye of the needle going away from you, and it's done. But in case you have a more modern machine, they also have automatic threaders. So the way that they work is you take the thread and it goes behind this kind of triangular hook, and then you want to tug on it so there's not too much tension, but it's like tight. And this direction is important because you want to make sure that when you bring it down, which we're going to do in a second with this gray lever, that the thread is crossing in front of the needle. So came loose real quick there, but do that again. So you just press down on the gray lever. Once you press on it all the way, you'll see that it kind of turns. And basically, my camera is not going to be able to get a close of enough view, but basically there's a almost microscopic sized hook that goes through the eye of the needle. And you just bring your thread in through these teeth that come out and lift it up a little bit just to make sure that that tiny, almost microscopic hook is going to grab it. And then when you lift the bar up, it pulls it through the eye of the needle. And then you can just kind of pull it the rest of the way through, let it slide under the gap of your presser foot, which for this, we're just using the standard presser foot because again, we're just doing a normal straight stitch. And just like that, you have threaded your machine. So from here, we can take our fabric and we have our fold line. So we're just going to fold on that line. And again, it's helpful that I'm using Sharpie for this because it kind of bleeds through the fabric, which you won't want. But I can kind of check and make sure that it's about halfway. If you're using a fabric marker and you don't have that point of reference, you can also measure 2 inches down from the top of the fabric, make your line there so that when you fold it, that's where the fabric is meeting. But yeah, so you'll just insert it here. And for this, I am not super concerned about the exact placement of the seam. What's important is that this folded part of the fabric gets sewn to this part of the fabric and that it is in a straight line. So what I can use as a guide actually is where my presser foot is where I want the edge of my folded piece of fabric to be. And that point of reference will keep it straight. But if you're more exact or you're following a pattern that has more exact instructions, a lot of times you also have these guides on the machine that kind of tell you how far from your needle your fabric is. So if I were using those, I could just flip my fabric around and it would tell me like how far this folded edge is from my needle. And you can kind of use that as a frame of reference too. But that being said, we're gonna sew our first stitch, which is really exciting. Yay! The sewing part of Intro to Sewing. So again, threads away from us while we sew. Have our folded edge, checking that our line is straight. And here I'm using this gray lever to bring the presser foot down. And if you don't put that presser foot down, your machine will generally yell at you and tell you to stop because it's not going to let you sew without the presser foot down. So now I am using the pedal of my sewing machine, and we're just going to do 3 stitches, and I'll tell you why in a second. So 1, 2, 3. Awesome. So now that we've done 3 stitches, there is probably going to be a button on your machine that kind of looks like a U-turn right here. And what that's going to do is that's going to backstitch. Now, on the older machines, it used to be, and a lot of the machines still have this, if they don't have the U-turn button, but this crank on the side of your machine will manually move your needle up and down. So if you turn it away from you, that will also make it backstitch. But since we have the button, we're going to use it. And that, again, is much more common in machines now. And we're just going to hold it down and we're going to do 3 stitches backwards. And the reason this is important is because you're going to want to start and end every single stitch that you do in your life with a back stitch, a series of 3 back stitches. 3 is kind of my go-to. If you really want to secure it, you can do as many as 5. Any more than that, and it's not really doing any extra good. But yeah, that will just keep your seam from coming undone later. However, there's also something in sewing called basting. And that's basically a seam where you don't backstitch. And the reason they use that is just instead of pins. So it's not meant to be something permanent. And because it's not meant to be permanent, you don't need that backstitch. But now I've come to the end of my fabric, and like I said before, we want to start and end every stitch we do with 1, 2, 3 back stitches. And this is a weird preference that I have, but aesthetically, I don't like when my threads are loose 3 stitches on the inside. So I'm gonna stitch 3 times again. And then at this point, whatever button you use, whatever lever you use to bring the needle up, for me, it is this turtle symbol. You're gonna press that, and that just brings your needle to the highest possible position it can go, which is so that you can release your fabric, pull it out. Then you can cut it loose with scissors, or your machine will probably also have a little hook, like that gray guy there. Yeah, right there. And that is actually a blade. So you can just pull your project away from the machine and tug on it on the blade, and that's that. And you can get started on the next stitch. So take 2. And when you're folding the fabric, you're going to want to make sure you're folding the ends towards the inside. And that will ensure consistency. So you don't have one end that's facing the inside and one side that's facing the outside of your bag. 3 stitches forward, 3 stitches back. A lot of times, people will have questions when their machine is clicking really loudly. And if your machine's doing that, it generally means that you have sewn with it so much that some lint has gotten caught inside the machine itself, or your needle has gotten dull. So the way you fix that is you just will follow your manual for maintenance on the machine, and you will change the needle and clean out whatever you need to clean out. But do not think that your machine is broken if you start hearing some clicking. It just means it's time to give it some love again. So we're just going to make sure you guys can see that. So we have our tails of our thread on either side, and we're just going to snip those. You don't want to get it so close to the stitch, just because having some does also help keep it secure. If you get too close to the stitch, you will have a chance of this thread being pulled through the loops. So I'm just going to finish cutting my threads. Now we've already got 2 straight stitches down, and this project is only going to require 2 more stitches. So depending on the look you're going for today's purposes, we're going to have right sides touching when we do the seam. So basically, the part of our bag that we would see on the outside is going to be basically in the middle. So when you're sewing, basically whatever is not the desired side will be facing out. And now for this stitch, we're just going to sew right up until we meet the stitches we've just made. And we're going to be using the other side of our presser foot as a guide. So basically, the fabric will be along this side of the presser foot. And again, that will help us ensure that we are keeping a straight line. 1, 2, 3 stitches, 1, 2, 3 back, and running right through it. Generally, you'll also have something on your machine akin to this bar here, and that controls the speed of your machine. So if you really want to go full force and just press on the pedal, you can. And if you're worried about the pressure of your foot making you go too fast, you can also adjust it so that it won't make you go too fast.
Older machines may not have those switches on them. I know the one that I have that's from the 70s does not. So if your machine doesn't have that, it's generally depending on how hard you're pressing on the pedal.
Yeah. And even with this machine, if you have it set to the max speed like I have, it's still going to mitigate that based on the amount of actual pressure you're putting on your foot. If you're just like tapping it gently with your foot, while it's on the highest speed setting, it's not going to go like 0 to 60, which is helpful. So now we're going to do the other side. Oops, almost forgot to clip the ends of my thread. So now doing the other side. And 3 stitches forward, 3 stitches back. All right. Cut, and we're going to cut our threads. And we are basically done with our bag. What you'll do is once you have this, you'll turn it inside out. Dun, dun, dun. Big reveal. Ta-da. Now at this point, really the only steps left to take are taking the cord or the ribbon that you have. I'm just gonna grab the stuff we cut earlier. And generally what you can do is you can turn it inside out again first. And this is just for as you pull the cord through. But you'll insert the cord through the top. And you can even make this easier on yourself by attaching your cord to, say, a paper clip, and then using that to feed it through. But I unfortunately do not have any paper clips on me, so I'm just using my finger. Bring it to the other side, have it go in again. And basically, you'll be done with your project. So just finishing up here. And here we go. You can see it's already even cinching, but you can just turn it right side out now. And you have your amazing drawstring bag. Cinchable, you can tie it up, make sure everything's secure. Just pull on it to undo it. And that's pretty much it. So now that we've gone through all of that, I am happy to answer any more questions that you all may have, either about what we just did or about sewing concepts in general that you think would be helpful for the group to know or have answered. Is there anything coming up? All right. Well, how are we doing on time, Caitlin?
We are at 7:50.
7:50. Wow.
Yep. So I also wanted to mention, if you do have any questions, you can also email us. I'm going to put our maker's email in the chat right there. So it's lib-makers@arlingtonva.us. If you have any questions about, I guess I could turn my video on. If you have any questions about sewing, we check that inbox very regularly, and we will try to help you out to the best of our ability.
Yeah. I will also mention that if you enjoyed this program, I highly recommend checking out our website again. If you found this program, next week we are also having a program on how to make your very own cloth face mask. And actually, I can grab the example I have.
The other thing I wanted to mention too is that all of the lesson plans for this particular program are actually available on the library's website as well.
Yep. I'll be uploading this fun video too, if you happen to just want to see my cat again. But next week we will be doing this cool cloth face mask. And yeah, thank you guys so much for attending. I hope you enjoyed it. And I look forward to seeing you guys at another program soon.